Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first of the 13 webinars that are part of the 2020 EMOS webinars program. My name is Monica Pratesi. I am Professor of Statistics from the University of Pisa in Italy, where this session is hosted. Today, I will also act as the webinar facilitator. Let me first explain for any newcomers that EMOS stands for the European Master in Official Statistics, a joint project of universities and data producers in the EU member states, EFTA, and EU candidate countries. If your university is interested in applying for the EMOS label, please consider that a permanently open call for university is available on the EMOS dedicated page on the Eurostat website. For staying in contact with the EMOS news and community, please follow the EMOS on Twitter. The EMOS account is @EU_EMOS. It is now my pleasure to introduce Mariana Kotzeva, Eurostat Director General, who will open the webinars program with a message.
Dear EMOS friends, it's my enormous pleasure to open 2020 series of webinars within the EMOS program. Do you know that we are doing this for third time now in already 4 years of existence of EMOS program? It turned to be a very successful way of bringing you around the computers and studying new things. Do you know that you are a member of a big EMOS family which now covers 33 members of the EMOS program in 18 countries? And we use various ways like webinars to promote the knowledge about the latest statistical developments. What is important maybe to use this opportunity is that to remind you that statistics make sense only when it's comparable. Therefore, by nature, by default, statistics cross the borders, and statisticians cross the borders to meet their colleagues, to meet their friends, and to discuss the new ways of doing statistics and satisfying users. Therefore, I would like to encourage you to use the EMOS program not only to look at the webinars, but also to be in a good contact with your EMOS fellows, with professors, with statisticians from practice, with users across the EU countries. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank to so many people who have been involved in EMOS program, from national statistical institutes, from the universities, from central banks, and to every one of you for your active participation in the EMOS program. What will be interesting in EMOS 2020 webinars? Of course, in Eurostat, we are trying to follow the latest developments and to provide for you the most interesting topics which could help you in your future career. I would like just to mention that in addition to the traditional domain topics like demography, for example, or economic statistical topics, this year we will include something on trusted smart statistics, on visualization, data visualization, or even to mention something related to software which is dealing with big data like Python and R. So you have a lot to see, a lot to do together with the presenters, and I would like to encourage you not to take them easy from the hook. Ask questions, comment proactively, and simply make a fun. This is what is done for you.
And before I give the floor to our speaker, let me explain briefly how we run the webinar today. As a participant, you can watch and listen to the session. To interact with the presenter, you can use the chat, represented by the comic symbol. We encourage you to prepare your questions and to pose them to the presenter during the question breaks. We will have a break after approximately every 10 slides. We will also have a final discussion at the end of the webinar. Should you have any technical problem, please try restarting this Skype for Business or the computer or device you are using. For more specific technical questions, you can use the chat and you will receive a personal reply. Today, I have the great pleasure to host Albrecht Wirthmann from Eurostat. Albrecht has worked in different domains at Eurostat since 1999. Currently, he is Deputy Head of the Unit Methodology and Innovation in Official Statistics at Eurostat, where he is focusing on developing and implementing the concept of trusted smart statistics, which was introduced with the Bucharest Memorandum on Official Statistics in a datafied society in 2018. As a member of the Task Force Big Data at Eurostat, he developed and worked on implementing the Big Data Action Plan and Roadmap at the level of the European Statistical System, initiated by the Scheveningen Memorandum on Big Data in Official Statistics. Today, he will speak about trusted smart statistics, which are a really hot topic for official statistics. Albrecht, the floor now is yours until the first question break.
Thank you, Monica. I uploaded my presentation. I think that everything is right. You can hear me as well? Yes, okay. Good. So today I will speak of the trusted smart statistics concept and how we are trying to implement this concept at Eurostat and within the statistical system in Europe. First, some information on Eurostat itself. So Eurostat is a part of the European Commission, so it's a DG, a Directorate General of the European Commission. At the same time, it's the Statistical Office of the European Union, and it's the central institution of the so-called European Statistical System that contains then bodies, so mainly national statistical offices, but also other institutions and departments who are responsible for official statistics within the European member states. So in principle, we have this threefold task at Eurostat: being member of the European Commission, being the statistical office of the European Union, and being the central member, the central institution of the European Statistical System. Okay, now I'm coming to the reasons why we have introduced this concept of trusted smart statistics. We have seen in the recent decade an enormous development in the direction of digitalization and datafication of a lot of activities that we are doing, and we are more and more interacting with the internet, more and more exchanging information on the internet, acting on the internet. And there we see that anything that is digital gets locked, so they are created a massive amount of information that reflects data and relationships that are exchanged via the internet. And in principle, individuals then become data fountains, because everything or a lot of things that they are doing now increasingly digital on the internet. And so in this way, they are becoming sources of digital data, and these sources of digital data are more and more collected by business companies, for example, in social networking, that then become data buckets. So we've seen a lot of intermediates on the internet, a lot of platforms which collect a lot of data on or a lot of information on individuals. We also see more digitalization of processes in the economy, which then produce data. So in principle, we are seeing the creation of data buckets and fountains. For the statistical offices, there are two possibilities of collecting these new data. Either you are addressing yourself to individuals to try to collect a part of the data that they are producing, or you are addressing yourself to mainly private companies who are collecting data and which would be interesting for producing official statistics. And we call these channels one B2G, business to government channel, so where we can access privately held data and creating private-public partnerships to use this data, or then the citizens to government channel. This includes then crowdsourcing of data, smart surveys, and also citizen-produced statistics. In this way, there is a fundamental differences with the data that we are collecting, so the statistical offices are collecting so far. So far, we are asking individuals about their name, about their gender, about their monthly income, for example, their expenditure. So we call this microdata because it's related to a certain individual. However, with these new data sources, we are observing mainly behaviors, and we are observing then data coming from sensors. So, for example, we can observe a heartbeat, the blood pressure of somebody, and we have to translate this observations into statistical data that we want to follow up. At the same time, this data is highly pervasive because it reveals much more on the individuals, and it's not controlled by the individuals as in the surveys that we are conducting. So it's much more pervasive than the data that we have been collected so far. And we call this data, I have to get used to, we call this data in difference to the microdata, we call this data nanodata to articulate that this is much more granular, what we are collecting on individuals when we are using these sensors, for example. And this microdata corresponds to surface data, or the nanodata to deep data with these new sensors. And these deep data, collection of deep data, has some implications on the data access and the data processing, the governance, the privacy, and the confidentiality of this data. Of course, this is much more pervasive, much more private than what we are collecting now in principle. So what is the difference between these new data sources? So we are not talking here of big data, because big data is mainly characterizing the volume of the data, but we think that the volume of the data is not an issue or is not a good characterization, because the characterization of this data is that this data is different to the data that we are normally collecting. So in principle, we have been collecting microdata at an individual level. Now we are going to this deep data or nano data, which is then going or reflecting some characteristics of an individual. There is one big difference. We are designing normally data collections according to their outputs. So we are doing mainly surveys then for this purpose. We are designing questions for this purpose. So the data that comes out of this is designed for a certain purpose of producing statistics in a certain domain. However, then for the new data sources, this is organic data. So this is data which already exists. And this data has to be repurposed for official statistics. So we have to analyze then about the information contents in this data, and we have to decide whether we can use this for producing official statistics or not. And it's mainly about the methods that we are applying to this data to extract the information that we would like to have. Normally, traditional data sources are structured. For these new data sources, there might be structured data sources, semi-structured data sources, or completely unstructured data sources when you think of data coming from social networks or data that you gain through web scraping, for example. And quite often, these data are not held by public institutions, but by private sector companies, which also implies a difference in the access and use of this data. So what matters for this data is not the size of the data, but the characteristics of this data. They are different from the traditional source. So big data we understand not as non-traditional data or new digital data. These new digital data come up with the new digital technologies, so with the digitalization process, also datafication process. We understand under datafication that relationships between individuals are datafied, for example, through likes in social networks, so that every expression of relationships, of activities somehow gets its image in digital data. These new digital technologies trigger new behaviors, so there is in principle these behaviors then are induced by technologies that are there, and the data in this new digital world is just a facet of the overall phenomenon, which also includes technologies and behaviors. And now I would like to stop for some first round of questions. If you have some questions, you can use then the chat facility to ask them.
I think that there are no questions until now. So maybe we can go on and summarize everything at the end.
Okay.
I would prefer, so we save time.
Okay, so I will go on. Okay. Now, this is a picture of the traditional production of official statistics. In principle, you are asking persons. Okay, there's a question about data quality then. Probably I will then refer to it in the next round, before the next round of questions. So in principle, there is a picture of the production of official statistics. Individuals are asked, or also enterprises are asked certain questions, mostly in surveys with questionnaires. These survey data are collected by the statistical offices. Increasingly during the last years, there are statistical offices use administrative registers. This is then databases that are created due to some administrative process, which contain information, for example, on the the residence of a certain individual, and then this information is increasingly used in traditional statistics. These data are normally internalized into the statistical offices, and it lies completely in the hand of the statistical offices to process these data, to apply a certain methodology, to produce some statistical output. But you see, now with the new world, there are new sources coming up, online platforms, for example, then data from smart devices, smart systems. Your car, for example, is transferring data on your driving behavior to a certain platform. Sensors are collecting data, and all these data gets logged, is collected somewhere. And when we think of these data sources as fuel and then the data productions as an engine, so in principle there are different sources of fuels there, and because of the characteristics of these new data, they also require in principle a new statistical engine, a new production engine, because due to the volume and the characteristics, it will not be possible just to internalize all this data into the statistical office. So we have to think about a new engine for producing statistics, and this engine relies mainly on, in principle, extracting the information that we are interested in, and then combining it with traditional statistics to produce some statistical output. So in principle, these new data sources are not replacing the old data sources, but they are augmenting these data sources and the statistical output. So we have to think about the hybrid vehicle to produce new statistics. So in principle, trusted smart statistics is an augmentation of official statistics, and we have to take a system level view. So we have to step back, taking a look at the picture as it is there, and have to think about a new system of producing the statistics, or using these new data sources to produce statistics, to incorporate them into the statistical process. And then we have to add new processes to integrate them with the existing processes. And this systemic view then requires some design principles, which I will now present to you. The first design principle is to push computation out, which means that in the past you had a system of then internalizing data sources. So you did this anyhow with surveys and censuses, which were conducted by statistical offices, but it was also with administrative data. So this data was internalized to the statistical offices and then processed, and the processing was done under the full control of the statistical offices. In principle, this means that data was shared with the statistical office with a new system of trusted smart statistics. We are sharing the computation. So we are pushing then this computation out to the source, which means that we have to share computation with the source, which means as well that we have to agree with the source on certain methodologies for processing this data, and we are also sharing control of the processing of this data. So it's not anymore in the hand only of the statistical offices, but it's a shared control and a shared responsibility. It's so going into this direction, or having these the experiences so far shows more and more that it is not possible to pull all this data into the statistical system, that it will be necessary really to pre-process the data at the source and then to process further this pre-processed data within the statistical system. What this means, that this pushing computation out means that you have to have you have to automate the process. So the methods has to be encoded into code, into machine executable codes. And that there is a need for a clear separation between the methodological development, so writing then the source code as well, via the production of executing this binary code. This is also requires then that we have to distinguish between the development of new statistics, where we have to have access, or official statistics have to have access to new data sources, or to at least a part of it, and then the execution of this code, which then is shared. The source code should be made public, should be made open source to increase the transparency, also increasing the transparency, also increasing the trustworthiness of, in principle, the partnership between the source and the statistical offices, and also increasing the quality through the scrutiny of more people that are out there who can detect errors in codes, for example. And as I already said, the methodological development requires data in-house of statistical offices, but this can be made with subsets of data, or also developments can be done outside the statistical offices with statisticians involved. Sharing computation means also sharing control in the production phase. And then this naturally combines also with secure private computing technologies. Here we come also to an issue of privacy of the data and confidentiality of the data. In principle, in the past, privacy and confidentiality was then guaranteed through law, that applied to statistical offices, and also to measures of securing these data in the statistical offices. Here, within the future, we see then the guarantee of the privacy and the confidentiality also in applying then algorithms that ensure privacy. So making not only impossible by law to breach privacy, but also making impossible by technology. And one case is, for example, secure multi-party computation. Here, I just want to illustrate that on the top, data was shifted into the statistical. So we shared the data into the statistical offices. The processing was in control of statistical offices. In the future, also with these new data sources, we are sharing the computation out, and we are sharing control of of the data processing, which also requires then agreements related to a particular computation instant. So sharing control means that you are applying a certain source code, a certain execution on a certain computation instant. Just this is a slide to demonstrate how, for example, secure multi-party computation is working. So this secure computation approaches, the private computation technologies. This is secure multi-party computation is one example of a variety of methodologies that are existing. In principle there, the issue is that you have different input parties, so a person A and a person B, who are asked to give their data. So, for example, if you want to calculate the average age of a certain person, of a certain number of persons, of a certain population of persons, in principle, you are asking this person for this age. You are then putting this into the statistical office, and out of all the data that you have, you can calculate certain statistical indicator like the average age. Here, in this way, with the secure multi-party computation, you are transforming the input from the persons into k-shares that are then processed by different parties. None of these parties, because you are dividing it up, you are encrypting the data, none of these parties can decrypt the original data, and only putting then the output of the computation together then provides the same output as if you ask the people individually and transported this data individually. This is called homomorphism. So in this way, you are then securing the privacy of the data, but you are producing the output that you would like to have. This secure private computing then allows you to disclose a certain desired output. So we have it in the picture here. You are producing some grappa out of the wine that you had, but without having to use then the whole input data, the whole wines. You are only interested in the grappa that should be an output. Then you should have transparency, you should have open source code, you should also block the queries that are there, so to follow up then the queries as a guarantee that these queries are not misused. And we should also promote the public scrutiny, for example, on the source code. And we are sharing control with the sources over the computation execution, which then should increase the trust and trustworthiness of both institutions. We increase then the participation, for example, if the other parties are individuals, and also their engagement into that. And in principle, this is what we call then trusted smart statistics. So you have deeper data, much more pervasive data. You have higher risks in using this data, higher risk in the privacy for this data. Therefore, you are needing stronger safeguards in the way that it's not only legally forbidden to do certain things, but that you are, from the setup of the technology that you are using, make it impossible to do to disclose these data, and also to include then the other parties in the computation process, hopefully to create more trust. That, on the other hand, then would then also allow you to use these more deeper data and to mitigate for these risks. Okay, now we are coming to a second question round.
To the questions. Many thanks for this very interesting presentation. And we have a couple of questions. The first one is, what method can we use to ensure this data are of quality? So the quality issue. And the other is, how about data confidentiality? This is something that you have already addressed, but in any case, the confidentiality of these new data sources, are there new means for data confidentiality in this new asset? And that transparencies and trustness are so very, very linked. So these are the main two questions we have.
Okay, for the data confidentiality, I think I already addressed this. I think that statistical offices have to apply new methods for doing this. So it's also not only on the output side so making then for producing the aggregate data, but also on the input side. For the methods that to ensure quality is, then of course we can, in principle, there are inherent problems in the data. Most of these big data sources, they have problems in concerning the bias of these data. So there it would be necessary to look at characteristics that are inherent in the data. Also to combine them with traditional data. So I'm saying that these new data sources would not replace the old one, but augment the old one. However, then it might be the case that the characteristic or the purpose of surveys might change. For example, we have already done an example there when you use mobile phone data for tourism purposes, for example, there a possible survey could then enlighten then the statisticians on the portion of the population who are using mobile phones, how they use mobile phones, if they are using only one, multiple mobile phones. So these information that you need to calibrate and to unbias the data. And additionally, you should not rely only on one certain source, but it's like with the national accounts where you have a viewpoint or where you take a look or where you produce figures from different approaches. You should have more data sources also that to extract information out of these data sources and then compare these data sources or compare the results of these data sources to verify your statistics that you are having. So in principle, using more redundant information to increase the quality of the information that you want to output there. And you have to have also for ensuring the quality, of course, you have to have as well information on the process, how these data are created, and also information on the characteristics of the data. So who is producing the data, for what purpose, and so on. But there, every big data source, or there are differences within the big data sources.
I think that also public scrutiny of the source code is an interesting aspect of all this process.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that we can go on with the presentation, please.
So I'm coming now to the second principle. This is that most of these new data sources can be used not only for producing statistics in one statistical domain, but in multiple statistical domains. And on the other hand is that data from one statistical domain can rely on different sources. This is simply shown here in the next slide. So in the past, you did a survey, for example, for producing information on the demography, on migration, so for a specific purpose. The administrative registers was also used in the same way, although this notion of multi-use of data then also was firstly introduced with these administrative registers, but this is much more the case for the new data sources. So I took the example of mobile phone data. Mobile phone data can inform then can form on the demography, on the population, can be used in tourism statistics, for example, but also can be used in labor force statistics when you, for example, think of seasonal workers. However, these new data sources must first be translated into an intermediate layer, which I would come on explain later on, to be used then by multiple sources. And to enforce this, in principle, using these new data sources, it requires a certain machinery that is in most cases only justified when you really reuse the data for different purposes. Okay, so now coming then to the third principles of a layered and modular organization of the data workflow. So we have to think of reference methodological frameworks that we then introduce to use these data sources. This is an example is, for example, when you have mobile phone data, so you have data that are produced when using mobile phones. And these data can be used for different statistical purposes. It's like, in analogy, when you have different kinds of forests of trees, you transform these trees into wood, which then is in a standardized way that can be used for producing different products out of that. So you are not going, when you want to make a chair, you are not going into the forest to cut a tree first, but then the craftsman or the industry is using then standardized products to produce a chair out of that. And the skills and abilities and the activities that are necessary for cutting wood is very different from the skills and capabilities for designing and producing furniture, for example. So in this way, we designed the so-called hourglass model, so which is then a layered approach then information that is then used by statisticians to produce statistics. In analogy, for example, if you think of the Internet protocol as such, this is a simple protocol that transfers packets of data which is used by a variety of applications. And this is the same or a comparable approach that we are trying to implement here with the new data. So in principle, you have, with this new data, you have different data of different technologies, generations. When you think of mobile network data, 3G, 4G, 5G, you have different data providers, different data sources with each provider configurations, and you have then also the complexity of the data semantics that lies within the source data. So all this is to then translate then to a parsimonial layer that contains, for example, a path or a location that is then used by statisticians for statistical application. And with this, you have to define mapping functions, so data to these conversional mapping functions, which then produces different input data like CDR signaling data with the mobile network data into a standard data layer that, for example, contains a path or a location. You need there the help of the technicians, or the technicians are doing this with involvement of the statisticians, and then statistic applications can rely on this convergence layer. How is it done? So these the transforming of the input data to this convergence layer is very technology specific. It extracts some spatial temporal information as accurately as possible. and then translate it into a standard format. In principle, this is to be worked out by the technology expert within the companies that are providing these data. You then have the functions that are then mapping this convergence layer to the different statistical applications, for example, to calculate population density, to calculate tourism trips. This is in principle lies in the hand or the responsibility of the statisticians, perhaps with support of the technology expert into this. And this uses then the data of the sea layer together with the metadata of the sea layer, then to construct statistical applications. The sea layer itself has to be in a kind of a normalized semantic, so a standardized layer. It has to be future-proof, and it has to be then invariant to different technologies that are already existing, and it has to be designed in the way that it also can absorb future developments of technologies there. So to summarize this in principle, we have new fuel, so these new data sources that also require a new engine to be processed. With this new engine, we are just designing and we are calling this trusted smart statistics. We are using new hardware, software to produce these or to implement these new processes. And we are very much relying on open source algorithms, on relationships with the users and the producers of this data. We need new methodological work to design these processes, also to design them in the view of the evolvability of these processes. And then there the ingredients is to have a modular approach, so to have divide up these processes in different modules, and then to implement then different modules for different outputs, but also for then the different inputs data, and also to be able to follow the technological process there. So we have to invest in this, in methodology and infrastructure. Okay, I'm now making a new break.
Yeah, a new break, but excuse me, would you add something? No? Because I would prefer to cluster all the questions to the final session of questions. Would be better goes through.
Okay, good. Then we come to the final thing. So I'm now presenting some initiatives at Eurostat that tries to implement this concept of trusted smart statistics. And there we are having different initiatives. One is the first to use then internet information, so internet websites, information to produce statistics. We are working on a new type of surveys, which we call trusted smart surveys, including then also handheld devices, smartphones into this concept. We are working on a methodological framework for mobile network operators' data. We are working in transport and logistics to produce new information on transport statistics, but also feed other kinds of information. We are looking at smart systems, for example, smart energy meters, and we are looking at Earth observation data. So for the first one, we are building a so-called web intelligence hub where we want to collect data which is somewhere on websites, but also using APIs for extracting information from platforms. And the first application that we are doing here is we are producing, or we are collecting information from online job advertisements to extract information on skills demand by expressed in these online job advertisements, and also trying to then improve then job vacancy statistics. Another project that we are testing is to extract information from enterprise websites to enhance information that is in business registers. What we are hoping there, so we want to produce complementary statistical products. We want to produce information on skills, which currently doesn't exist yet. We would like to increase then the temporal and the spatial granularity of this information, so to go deeper than the NUTS 1 or 2 level that we are working on currently. And that we want to also introduce a new concept of intermediate data sets that could be used for different statistical products. Yeah, so to introduce this concept of convergence layer. The next project is we are currently working on combining then interactive data through queries, so just asking people. This was done in the past using questionnaires or web questionnaires. We want to integrate this on mobile devices, and at the same time we want to use passive data that is collected by sensors on the mobile devices like GPS, for example, or some activity sensors, to then infer information on, for example, commuting would be an example, or detecting a home location. This requires, in this context, we are also looking at methodologies for secure private computing, not to disclose then this individual information. And we are looking at then inferring from sensor data on activities that the individuals are doing. For example, when they are somewhere out in an unusual place or away from their home location, to try to infer what they are doing, if this is a tourism trip, for example. And then we are also trying to give a feedback to the individuals. Also, for example, comparing their individual data with comparable groups of persons, and also to give information directly, adjusted information to the person, back to the person, to close this loop. So to have also an engagement with the citizen who are providing this information. There we are first, or the first applications is with the time use survey and household budget survey, but we are trying to set up a platform that can be used for implementing different kinds of surveys. Then for the network of mobile network operators data, we are then here developing this methodological framework. Well, we are developing robust methodologies for selected use cases. One use case, for example, is population density. Another use case is tourism, to detect tourism trips. We are building this together with the mobile phone companies and the technicians who know about this data. All these developments are taking place on the premises of the mobile network operator, so no data leaves this, and we are trying to apply these privacy enhancing technologies to extract information out of this. Initial focus is on population and tourism. Then for the smart systems, we have a project. This is done together with the member states, the NSIs. Here is a picture from Estonia to use smart meters information to enhance then the information, statistical information on household consumption of energy, of electric energy. We are doing this at household level, but also for enterprises. There, the aim would be to be able to publish this information faster and in higher spatial granularity. We are using, for example, information from ship position data to infer on routes of ships, to calculate, for example, distances between ports, but also to improve then the information in transport statistics, but to also use this information on container ships, for example, to relate them to economic indicators on trade. We are doing now this for ship information, but we are also thinking of extending it to air traffic or railway traffic. In another project, we are using or exploring the use of Earth observation data, so satellite images, for using it to improve agricultural statistics or crop statistics, but also to improve land cover statistics and build-up area statistics. And we are using also this information in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals indicators, for example, on green urban areas. Okay, so I'm now coming to the end. There are some further readings, some literature, and I also wanted the readings. Okay, there's a page missing, probably to the change of the computer. So the essence now with this trusted smart statistics, in the past, in principle, data was a scarce commodity. We all organized and focused on the collection of this data. I think with these new data sources, we have to focus in the future, because there is a lot of data out there. We have to focus on extracting the right information out of this data to distill the information that we need for statistics. This is the end of my presentation.
Okay, many thanks. Many new suggestions and impressive from my point of view. So we are really changing scenario. And there are questions for you. First of all, I have this one. So are there data formats or some standards, framework related to particular types of the data? Specific framework for processing raw, maybe mobile network data?
Okay, where we are, in principle, there is not much existing yet. So everything that is, or there are developments ongoing, not only in the area of statistics, but also in principle in reusing these data for other purposes as well. So in the economic sector, enterprises are very interested into that, but there is no there are no accepted standards out there. There are also some developments going on in the standardization bodies, but so far this is all development currently. And especially for the mobile phone data, there we are actively then also researching on these data.
And just to have your ideas.
Probably for there is this, for example, the how's it called? These, well, from the Data Pop Alliance, there's this open algorithms, for example. This is an initiative for standards for example, this secure multi-party computation. There are some hardware implemented standards, but there are also some companies developing then methodologies for implementing this secure multi-party computation, for example.
Okay, and another question is about, first of all, thank you for your answers and your replies. They are very concise and exhaustive. But there is another question that is about the measure disadvantage or drawbacks so far. What you can say about this? Just balancing what you have observed and known.
So disadvantages, of course, are that we have to rely on using these data, these new data sources. So we have to go to partner with the private companies, and so far there is a lot of reluctance. We have to build trust with these private companies to really use this data, and we have to have also reliable access or use of this data. So there are also on the side of legal initiatives, there are some initiatives. There has been by our colleagues from DG Connect within the European Commission, there have been some initiative on B2G sharing data. There has been an expert group, and there has recently been a communication on the European data strategy, which then is about this issue of reusing this privately held data. So there will be some developments ongoing, and what is necessary to have really to have also a reliable access based on legislation, which is we are currently thinking of and developing. And of course, these data sources are insecure, are containing information that might not be of interest to statisticians, and it requires quite a lot of interactions with the data holders to understand this data and also to be able to define this intermediate layer and to process the data. So there's quite a lot of interaction necessary.
I would like to clap hands to Albrecht for this beautiful seminar.